Very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News Desk on this 27th day of January 2017. Our sign language interpreter is William Silla and I am Akisa Wandera. The Kenya Defense Forces says Kenyan soldiers repulsed Al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia's Kolibayo area. CORD leader Raila Odinga slams Uhuru's government for failing to curb corruption. And nurses now say they will begin their strike on Wednesday, February the 1st. Good afternoon. Now, the Kenya Defense Forces says Al-Shabaab militants who attempted to attack their camp in Somalia's Kolibayo were repulsed, killing several terrorists. Colonel Paul Njuguna says the Al-Shabaab tried to access the camp using a suicide vehicle-borne improvised device. Colonel Njuguna says the KDF has launched an intensive pacification operation which is reinforced by the air and land forces. KDF says it has destroyed 2 vehicles fitted with explosive devices as the militants claim to have overrun the camp manned by Kenyan soldiers serving in an African Union force. Kolibayo is a Somali town in Lower Juba close to border town of Badahe. Just 2 days ago, Kenyan troops at Kolibayo attacked an Al-Shabaab base at Badade before retreating to Kolibayo on 15th of January last year. An undisclosed number of Kenyan soldiers were killed when the Al-Shabaab attacked an airbase in El Ade. The Kenya Defense Forces camp had a company of not more than 120 soldiers. Now, CORD leader Raila Odinga now alleges that the country is at a break point on the issue of corruption. Raila says that Kenya has returned to the Super League of Corruption after being listed by Transparency International as among the 20 most corrupt countries globally. Odinga has accused the president of choosing to play blind and mute on the scourge, which he says is spreading its tentacles across the nation.
Gimmicks never last. As the curtains come down on the Afro cinema called the Jubilee regime, Kenya is at a breaking point on the issue of corruption. The time for decisive action has long come and gone. Even the eloquent, smooth and slick talkers have lost their tongues. In the latest Transparency International report, Kenya has returned to the Super League of Corruption, listed among the 20 most corrupt countries in the world, alongside big players like Bangladesh, Cameroon, the Gambia, Madagascar, and Nicaragua. One would expect some outrage from an administration that claims it is failing because the opposition is on its neck. Yet the president has chosen to play blind and mute on a scourge that is clearly spreading its tentacles around the nation and getting more people into deeper poverty and misery while paralyzing public services. As we speak, Jubilee is syndicating $800 million to international bank loans, not for development, but to plug the holes that their looting has created. This is another Eurobond. The day of reckoning is here with us. Those who thought it would never come can now see for themselves. Companies are retrenching daily. The stock market is in a free fall. Only the corrupt are thriving in Kenya. Corruption is the only industry doing well. But the administration feels nothing. The entire cabinet is being rolled out at the expense of taxpayers to rally votes for Jubilee in readiness for more plunder. We can only expect more last-minute tenders to put more money into the hands of tenderpreneurs who have been supplying us with air these past 4 years. We can only expect that the presidency, which is the patron for the corruption cartels and racketeers in and around the government, will smoothen the infrastructure for more corruption.
All right, that's earlier on opposition leader Raila Odinga there talking about matters corruption. In our subsequent bulletins, we'll be giving you more details on the same. Now, the Kenya National Union of Nurses has issued a fresh strike threat following what they term as the insincerity of county governments in paying a nursing service allowance. The allowance was part of the promise made by the nurses, as a part of a return to work agreement which was signed in December last year. The Union Secretary General Seth Panyako has announced that come 1st of February, if the money is not disbursed, then they will paralyze medical services across the country. Now, our reporter Timothy Otieno covered that particular press briefing and will be joining us later on in the program to give us details about that fresh threat made by union nurses to go on strike come February 1st. And as we continue talking about matters strike, remember, lecturers and non-teaching staff of public universities in the country are also on strike. Yesterday, Education Cabinet Secretary met a number of union officials. But let's cross over there right now as they meet their members and give an address and listen to the latest developments from that end.
Since we launched the strike on 19 January, we have made spirited efforts to lobby the government to come to table and negotiate with us 2013-2017 CBA, but in vain. Once again, the government has embarked on again spirited efforts to dupe, blackmail us without negotiating the CBA. Yesterday, the government forwarded to us a raft of requests. Today, we summoned our National Executive Committee to deliberate on the request. And I would like to invite the Secretary General to categorically state what we have decided today. Secretary General.
Thank you very much. I want to say that today NEC met, and in their wisdom, the National Executive Committee has rejected the statements of intention by the government. They have resoundingly voted that the strike continues until the 2013-2017 CBA is negotiated, signed, registered, and implemented. I want to tell all chapter secretaries across the country to intensify the strike. Intensify the strike. Because dons do not eat statements of intentions. We want CBA. Yes. And what we are going to do, we want a reasonable counteroffer. If you still contemplate that we are going to call off this strike with a paltry 3%, forget it. And we are ready. If education is expensive, try ignorance. Thank you. Welcome. Solidarity. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes
never be divided. We shall never be divided. We shall never be divided. For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Well, university dons under the umbrella of the University Academic Union have issued have said that they will continue with their strike. Remember, yesterday, Education Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i met them, and as they say, the government gave them a statement of request, but they have rejected those requests, saying they will not go back to work until when the CBA is implemented, that dons do not eat requests from the government, but actual payment from some of the demands that they are making. And they have urged the chapter secretaries across the country to intensify the strike and pile more pressure on the government to ensure that they implement the 2013 collective bargaining agreement that was signed. Remember, this is the first week of the strike by the lecturers and non-teaching staff who have paralyzed learning in public universities in the country, and we'll definitely be giving you more details about that situation in our subsequent bulletins. Now, back to another striking story. The Kenya National Union of Nurses has issued a fresh strike threat following what they term as the insincerity of county governments in paying a nursing service allowance. The allowance was part of the promise made to the nurses as a part of a return to work agreement which was signed in December last year. The Union Secretary General Seth Panyako has announced that come 1st February, if the money is not disbursed, then they will paralyze medical services across the country. Our reporter Timothy Otieno covered that particular press conference and now joins us live from our city centre studios with details about that fresh strike notice. Good afternoon, Timothy. The nurses seem to not be as serious as doctors. They went on strike, then they went back to work. Now this is a fresh threat. What exactly is happening?
Then for a second time in slightly over their week in last year.
All right, we apologize for that technical problem we are encountering with the sound by our reporter Timothy Otieno, but as we try to fix it so that he can give us more details about that, let's take a look at what was said earlier by the Nurses Union Secretary General Seth Panyako.
We have also been informed that there has been a new allowance that has been mooted by Council of Governors and the Ministry of Health, known as the Health Service Allowance. We want to tell the government that the health service allowance that has been mooted shall be paid to all health workers, including doctors. I don't have to speak on behalf of doctors, but I'm saying all health workers. Doctors have their own union. But once you introduce a health service allowance, it must be paid up and above the nursing service allowance. The health service allowance that they are thinking about is not going to replace the nursing service allowance. If they pay the health service allowance, then they are going also to pay up and above the nursing service allowance. That must be very clear with government.
The ball stops at the doorstep of the government because they signed the agreement. So when they start telling us that they have not generated the codes, the government procedure is a very long procedure, I think we would have stayed out for them to sign to get the code, because I'm sure the code would have been generated before December was over.
All right, let's go back to our reporter Timothy Otieno with more details about that fresh strike notice by Nurses Union. Timothy, good afternoon. You were telling us about the latest developments from the Nurses Unions about the strike that would begin on the 1st of February if county government does not honor a particular promise.
Well, we've heard from the Secretary General there, Seth Panyako, who has said that they have heard that there could be an introduction of a health service allowance by the county governments. Of course, they are, reading a lot into it and saying that it is really suspicious that this allowance is being introduced, yet they had signed for a nursing service allowance. Now, this nursing service allowance would cost the government approximately 7 billion shillings and was supposed to ensure that nurses under job group G to L get 20,000 shillings in their accounts, as well as those from job group M and above were awarded a 15,000 shillings nursing allowance. Now, the first phase of implementation of this money was supposed to be the end of this month, where it was supposed to be paid on a ratio of 60 to 40%. So this month, they were supposed to be receiving 12,000 shillings. Those are nurses in between job groups G to L, and then they would receive a later 8,000 shillings during the second phase that is expected to kick off in July. Those in job group M and above are supposed to be receiving 9,000 shillings by the end of this month, and then a further 6,000 shillings during the second phase in July. What Seth Panyako is saying is that they are reading suspicion in the fact that out of the 47 counties, only 2 counties have been able to honor this agreement, and those are the counties of Bomet and Lamu that actually factored this amount of money in their monthly budgets for the month of January, meaning 45 other counties are yet to honor this agreement, and they're saying that in the next 4 days, if that money is not deposited to the accounts of the nurses in the country, then they will engage in one of the country's largest strikes yet. They say that this time, if they begin the strike on the 1st of February, they are not going to end it until they come up with a collective bargaining agreement, and that's around the time of the 2nd of March, when they had agreed that by that time they'll have a collective bargaining agreement. Now, the reason for this strike notice is that they read suspicion and a lack of goodwill from the county governments in regards to honoring the return to work formula that they had signed in December, and basically they're saying that they will not be taken for a ride and that they need to ensure that their best interests are put first, and especially the interest of the nurses, whom they insist for a long, long time have been ignored by both the national and county government. Akisa.
Timothy, thank you very much for that update. Timothy Otieno joining us from our city centre studios with details of the fresh threat by nurses, and they've said that they will go back on strike from the 1st of February if county government does not honour their promise.